Ever feel like you're running on autopilot instead of actually living? You aren't alone. In this energizing episode, I chat with former engineer turned leadership coach Kris Liebau about why even the brightest leaders slip into robot mode and what it takes to switch on your self awareness circuitry. Get ready for some nerdy metaphors, real talk about feedback, and surprisingly relatable stories about spreadsheets, pizza rewards, and the myth of multitasking. Tune in if you're ready to get out of your head and back into the driver's seat of your own life. Alrighty, well, hello everybody. Welcome back. I am thrilled today because we're going to be talking about ourselves in a different way than we ever have. My guest is going to get into how we maybe are moving through life in an autopilot / robotic way. And the reality is we need to, at this point, more than any other time, be less robotic and more self-aware and in our bodies. So I'm not gonna delay at all. I can't wait to introduce Miss Kris Liebau. How are you today?
Thanks so much for having me, Kimberly.
So tell us a little bit about yourself so that everyone can understand why this topic is so uniquely perfect for you.
So, I have an interesting history. So, I won't say I used to be an engineer. That's what I used to get paid to do. And now I'm a leadership coach and speaker. And when people find out that I'm an engineer, they say one of two things. They say, "Oh, well, that explains a lot." Or they might say, "But you know how to talk to people."
Mm. And why is that so? Explain that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a super massive analytical part of my brain that spreadsheets and flowcharts are my space. But I also have this ability to be able to have a conversation and be curious in I'll say a good rather than a judgmental way. Because as engineers and scientific people, we're like, oh, well, why is that? What is it? We're always trying to fix a problem. But the thing is when it comes to people, people don't like to be fixed. And so it takes a different kind of curiosity in order to build that connection and step away from the analytical processes.
My goodness. I think this is why I enjoy our conversations because my little project management, my little PMP heart lives in Excel. And structure is so important to me. But I, like you, am very, very social. Definitely not an engineer. I don't think I could have passed all those classes. But I appreciate how there's that balance between left brain and right brain operation.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much methodology, and we have to have systems, and we build these models of how things work. And we like to have the understanding of the if then stuff. And people aren't that logical to be able to develop those structures so that we can navigate relationships and emotions and difficult conversations.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, which I find fascinating in the work that you do, is how at times people operate in an autopilot sense. And or we just do things because it's just what we know, it's routine. I kind of defer to it as robotic in nature. And I would love to get more of your thoughts about why are we moving through life that way, especially in a time right now where you feel like people are not, but we actually are very attuned to kind of our little systems.
If you think about it, we've we have a lot of well-worn neural pathways. We have built certain habits that we have from a very early age, and it's probably not intentional the way that those have been set up. So it's the whole positive negative reinforcement that we've experienced, whether we were a kid, whether we were in the office. I was always rewarded for getting good grades and over delivering, and it built this cycle of perfectionism. That was the thing that was exciting to me. And I'm like, well, of course, this is what people want. This is the expectations. So it wasn't intentional that happened. It's just one of those pieces that we don't realize that we've societally have programmed ourselves to value certain things or work through challenges in a specific manner.
Well, I mean, immediately when you were talking about the reinforcement, I immediately thought of like, I was just having this conversation recently about libraries. You remember the reading clubs in the summer that if you read so many books, you got a personal pan
Yeah.
pizza? I think when Pizza Hut let that go, that was the demise of that brand. They should bring it back.
Book it.
I like the idea about that, that we begin our programming very young. So we're reinforced to operate and move through the world in a certain way. Um, how is that a good or bad thing when specifically when we talk about leadership?
Well, it's great when good habits become automatic and they feel authentic and natural. The challenge is that when we're operating on autopilot, we're not necessarily paying attention or being really deliberate or tuned into what's going on around us. We may not understand the impact that's happening. We have a certain intent, but we're not really truly paying attention and we're being tuned into what's going on around us so that we can adjust.
How do we become more aware of these automatic behavior or responses?
Well, obviously, we can work with folks like us, and there's all kinds of different assessment tools and things that are out there. Sometimes you get feedback from people and you're like, oh, that's them, or you discount that. Sometimes you can start to see trends. If you want to know what your personal patterns are, if you have a trusted friend, partner, colleague, some bestie, where you feel comfortable having that conversation around, what are you seeing or how would you characterize my patterns or to describe that to somebody? Because the challenge a lot of times is there's a gap between that intent and impact. And so this comes back to those things about psychological safety and culture and having those workplaces where you can provide feedback. One of the best ways with feedback is to get good at receiving it, to welcome it, and not
Yeah.
necessarily disqualify it, right? Like it's a gift, whether or not you explicitly asked for it or agree with it.
It's so funny. I was just having this conversation yesterday. I have a love-hate relationship with engagement surveys as a key form of feedback for leadership. I'd love to get your thoughts about this, but I often feel that it's a false metric of what's happening. In part because people give feedback via an engagement survey. I can't tell you how many times in my career I've watched leaders take what's written on the page, not like the 4 or 5 star stuff, but the actual comments, immediately try to figure out who it was so that they could then immediately discredit it as just some disgruntled person. Or if there's a trend that has shows up at the mid-year and well, they just don't understand where it's coming from, so it must not be valid. Or my favorite. Well, when they speak about leadership, I think what they're doing is thinking about broad leadership. They're not talking about me leadership. They're talking about some
Okay.
other, like, even when given something, it's fascinating to watch how quickly leaders move to either discount or deflect when they get feedback that they don't like or they don't agree with.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we could do a whole podcast just on feedback. It says so much about them and where they're coming from and their experience of something that, right? It's when you get the feedback, how do you have a conversation about that to really understand what's going on?
And one of the things that I would love your thoughts about is going back to that idea. Getting constructive feedback is not easy, especially if you are in a position where you feel like you are going above and beyond for your team. You are killing yourself for your team. And you get these, whether it's through a one on one, an engagement survey, wherever, however it comes to you, that you're not meeting the mark. What advice would you give to a leader who is finding themselves feeling defensive about the information that's coming at them? Because that's one of the things we talk about, right? Is you got to drive awareness of how your autopilotness may be affecting you, but knowing that it's really hard when it actually happens. What advice would you give to somebody?
So what I want to say is don't take it personally, but people are gonna be like, I can't do that, right? Because it's again, I think it's the when you look at it as a gift, right? Like sometimes we get socks or rabbit bone broth from a neighbor that randomly showed up on my front porch. We threw it away, but it's right, it's a
Yeah.
gift and we get to choose what we do with it. And so I think I agree with you about the whole anonymous feedback part because it's just this random data point without any of the context in it.
Yeah.
And so when you welcome feedback and you're open to have a conversation about that or, to get some specific examples about things because if you're a leader and you feel like you're bending over backwards to help people and people aren't appreciating that, like what are their needs? What are their expectations? How do you put your curiosity hat on to know what it is that they need? Because if you're running around doing all this stuff that people aren't valuing, that's a gift. They're coming to you and telling you that they need something else. And so, how do you reset to dial in to what it is that they truly need?
Is this episode hitting a nerve? Are you facing complex people challenges and have tried leadership books, workshops, and the advice from everyone, and somehow it's still not working? Now imagine having a trusted leadership partner who understands your specific challenges and strengths. My one on one leadership program provides the support you need with a customized plan. If you'd like to learn more, click on the link in the show notes and book some time with me. I'll explain how it works. Now back to the show. Yeah, I think if you are in a healthy emotional state, you can probably balance it very well. I always say to people, when you're in a position where you're moving into burnout and you're emotionally struggling to regulate yourself in general, this could be a sign for you. Like if you get feedback and your immediate emotion is anger, is like lashing out, that might be the moment to take a breather. Because again, I do agree with you. If 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 presented in the right mindset, feedback is huge. It helps you become aware of these habits and these behaviors that we have, whether we intend them to be there or not, right? Because I think the intention is also a huge component of when we end up going into autopilot mode, robotic mode. You maybe heard something and you ran after it, and now you are working yourself to the bone to fix a problem that maybe is no longer a problem. It creates this vicious cycle. If you choose to listen, it can help you maybe break out of some of your own patterns that aren't actually serving you. But it does suck. I'm not going to sit here and say that hearing things, people that you value say, wow, you're shrill, or, I love working for you, but lately you are just not that fun. Like lately you're a tyrant. And as much as it hurts in the moment to hear, it's also maybe the emergency light, if you will, on the dashboard of like, hey, maybe this is a moment to stop, reassess. And to your point, if it feels safe and you're able to do it, go have some other conversations with people you trust that you can be honest and vulnerable with in that moment.
Yeah, and I wholeheartedly agree, Kimberly. And one of the things I want to come back and loop around on to something I feel is very important that I didn't mention is it's not about giving everybody on your team what they want, right? They may not have perspective on what you're doing and how that is benefiting, or not everybody can really truly knows what it is that they need. So that's why the conversation is and the curiosity part of it is so important, and to make sure that it's an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, it was so funny because I just had a conversation this morning about someone who has a boss and they're speaking two different languages. And so needs are not being met on either side because for some reason there's some translation missing. And so the frustration and the inability to work efficiently disappears overnight.
Yeah, well, thinking about this idea of autopilot and bringing the in, when we're on autopilot, our active listening is not engaged because we're headed somewhere or we're thinking farther ahead. We're not fully present. And so how can we again really turn off all of, put away some of the open tabs? How can we quiet down and be present for the current conversation in order to be able to pick up on some of these subtexts and make time? Because the autopilot's triggered a lot by I got to get this done. I've got my machete out. I'm just trying to make it through the day and check these things off that I need to get done. So, how can we place more value in these opportunities we have to interact?
So when you said the word presence, I know that many engineers in my life, and I feel like when you say things like presence or mindfulness, the concept of woo almost makes them physically respond in a non pleasant fashion. You can almost hear the eye rolling. There's some hippy dippy stuff. So, from an engineer's perspective, because I appreciate that you're talking about presence being an important component, how can you articulate presence in a way that doesn't give such a woo-woo feel, like, to maybe those of more of the engineering persuasion who are listening today? Can you talk about it in a way that doesn't seem so hippy-dippy and high in the sky idea? What does that look like?
Yeah, to me, it's really about, so a lot of times I'll talk about this mental processing RAM, that we're present, we're in this conversation, but we have all of these other thoughts that are going in so many different directions. We're mapping out the steps, either what we're going to say or what the details of the plan are going to look like, that we're using this additional processing power that we're missing what's in front of us. And so how can we, instead of multitasking, how can we take that monotasking approach so that we can direct our full attention on what it is that's in front of us?
Oh, I love it. There's more studies coming out now that say that multitasking is a complete farce.
Yeah, so we only have so much bandwidth.
Yes.
And so that's the challenge, is if you're
Well,
trying to be present with somebody, and that's the challenge of life too, right? You got your grocery list, you got to take your dog to the vet, and there's all these other things, and there's this meeting that's coming up. And that's what drives this autopilot of just like, how do I get through this conversation? How do I get this done? How do I get my point across? And it kills our curiosity and the exploration.
I love that you use the analogy of a computer processing power, because your computer can only run so many tabs at one time. It can only run so many programs at one time. Our brains are not as awesome as we are as humans, and as fantastic as our bodies are. Our brains are probably not as efficient as our computers are today. And so I love that you made that connection. I also say things too, like, if you think about things at 100%, if your computer runs at 100%, it's going to overheat pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
always I think about this often when we say, oh, I gave 110%. Well, that's not possible.
So
A
I talk
fire would
about it.
happen.
I
So
talk
when
about
we
it
think
as,
about yeah,
okay, so in this engineering context, when we design something, it has a certain operational capacity. It's designed to work at this percentage of the duty cycle, right? It's designed to do something. We're not designed to work at 100%. We need to be somewhere, like if we're at that 70%, we have surge capacity ability so that when we need to go into overdrive, that we can do it. But if we run flat out at 100% all the time, we can't do it. We're not designed for it.
or like bringing us back around to being present for people. If you're running at overdrive and you're literally smoke starting to come out of your ears, the person sitting in front of you is never going to get the attention you probably want to give them and that they deserve. And then that creates the cracks in the foundation that eventually result in engagement issues and lower productivity and potentially turnover, because no one can operate that way and show up for people the way they want, both personally or professionally.
Agreed.
Mm. I'm loving how nerdy this conversation is.
Is this a challenge?
Well, but not necessarily,
Yeah.
no. But we don't often talk about it in this capacity. I'm a big believer in, one, there's no judgment. We all think about the world and move through the world in very, very different ways. My brother and I've actually had him on the podcast, and we had an entire episode about the fact that we both grew up in the same house and what did we get from our parents that are the same and how are we fundamentally different. You can be in the same profession, but your brain and how you think about and move through things can be different. I love to be able to talk about very human stuff in a different way that maybe captures listeners' attention to think about how they're moving through the world and what could be better or different for them to show up for the people that depend on them the most.
Yeah. One of the things I was thinking about, we look at autopilot and engineering that tends is we're problem solvers. Like we see problem, we're like, okay, we start to envision the solution. Like, what is this going to look like? What software can I use? The challenge is if we don't pause to make sure that we understand the problem or the need, right? Because we're fixers, like, oh, there's a problem. Like, I'm smart. I can go fix that. But sometimes it's not sexy to stop and pause and put the brakes on and have a conversation to make sure that we really, truly understand what it is and what would be helpful for them. Like, we can envision something. And so that's where there's this balance of our ability to solve the problem and come up with a solution, and then really truly understanding and knowing, what solution would be valuable to somebody else. And on a more personal level is, do they really want you to fix it? Or is this just just like a stress reducing conversation where somebody's just kind of coming in and lodging a complaint, and then you go through and do all this work and somebody's like, oh, I was just kind of like off the cuff mentioning that.
I just needed to get it off my chest.
Yeah, and this is just like a relationship. Like if you have a partner and you come home and you're talking about something and the other person just dives in and wants to fix it for you, you're like, get away from me, right? So you're like, I just needed to get it out. So this is one of those things where somebody brings something to us. We have an assumption maybe about what they're asking us to do or what they need from us.
Yeah.
How do we set that expectation around what's helpful and valuable?
One of my thoughts, I might have more of an engineering brain than I give myself credit for, because like when people show up with a problem, I feel like I can quickly see the solution. Like the solution's easy to me. Like, oh, like, and you get excited because you can see how to fix this problem. Sometimes I have moved through life quickly, not even, maybe I asked them and was like, hey, do you need help? Yes. But because it was so easy for me to envision how to fix this problem, I didn't slow down enough to communicate what I was doing, how I was doing it, what I needed from them. Like, to do those little bitty pieces and parts, because to me it was so obvious, but it's not always obvious to others.
Well, and the other part of that too is like that's the facts and data part. Like that's just the execution side of it. And sometimes it's not that that person doesn't have an idea of what the plan or vision is. It's more around this emotional and motivational side of stuff that, right, they're scared or it's uncomfortable or there's a lot of uncertainty. And what happens if I, go do this thing and it doesn't work out and it fails? And so which thing is more important?
I love this. It's quite interesting to me in this idea of when we get stuck in kind of just chugging along doing our things, it becomes, we can unintentionally create harm without meaning to.
Oh, yeah, it's intent and impact. I mean, right, we both work with leaders and they're good, right? They're good people and they appreciate their teams. They want to do well. They want people to succeed, but they don't always understand how certain things impact their team. Closing that gap becomes so essential, right? To be fulfilled, knowing what you're doing is providing the value and that people feel valued and they know what to expect from you. Build that culture.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be big things with regard to impact. I often think about how many times I've watched it play out where just a flippant comment was made, like, because you're rushing to check things off that list, and get things done, where someone didn't realize the depth of impact their words held until after it was delivered and it was too late. And again, it wasn't because someone was trying to be hurtful, harmful, malicious, but it was just in the speed of things we didn't take the time to really think through what was being said.
Yeah, like I said, especially we're in the zone, and sometimes it's better
You
to
and Einstein and Einstein.
step away and come up with the succinct response.
Yeah. I'm so happy you have come on to talk with us. My goal is to always try to bring great representation across how different people view the world and think about the world. And I genuinely think you're the first engineer I've had on the show.
I
So
am
that's pretty exciting.
so honored.
Well, I'm just grateful you wanted to come because, like, this is such a big topic and it's so important to the day to day. Like, it matters in a day to day component, in the big ways, in the small ways. And it's something I firmly believe every single one of us, engineer or not, takes for granted that we all have our little autopilot moments and we all have our little autopilot actions. How important it is to maybe draw some awareness to that is pretty important.
Yeah, and the other point around this autopilot part is we have so much more choice than we realize because there's something that comes up and we just automatically pick A because that's the easiest. When we slow down and pause, we can start to see some of the other options that present themselves. That opens some of the creativity and innovation and maybe even some of the satisfaction that people feel they're missing.
Well, I just want to say I love that. I don't want that to be your final word, but I would love to say thank you for being here. What is your one key takeaway or action you would love for them to go take?
I think it really comes back to the choice part is, if you're going through and you're like, I don't have choice or I wish this could be a different way, use that as a signal to pause and think about what are the other options that are available to you.
I love it. Well, thank you. And so, anybody who's interested in learning more about Kris, I'm going to have her information in the show notes. So, go check her out. She is incredibly active on LinkedIn. She is constantly giving a talk somewhere. So, if you get to go see her in person, I highly recommend it. Thank you again for coming on the show. It really means a lot.
Thanks, Kimberly. This was great.
We'll have you back. We'll talk more about feedback.
Will do.
Two things before I let you go. One, if you've ever gotten any value from the show, please leave a 5-star review. It really helps and absolutely makes my day. The second thing is if you have any thoughts you'd like to share with me, please shoot me an email at podcast@KimberlyJBenoit.com. I'd love to hear from you. All right, see you in the next episode.